So guess what? I lied again. Sorry. So I didn't bring the kids. We're actually going to bring you the kids on Monday. So I mean, you don't really need them for now. But if for some reason some of your colleagues are not here today and you know them, like tell them to come on Monday, you know, like because they do want to get the kid. And I promise I won't lie again on Monday. You're actually gonna get the kids on Monday. So anyway, so today we're gonna talk about embedded systems for audio DSP. So this is a completely different topic from what we've done so far. So we're not going to do any programming today. Like this is just like a proper lecture, and so we're just going to talk in general about the different possibilities that exist to do real-time audio DSP in embedded systems. And you'll see that there is actually a lot of different potential options. Okay. So the first thing that I'm going to ask you is, what do you think an embedded system for real-time audio processing is? Can you give me some examples? So what is an embedded system? That's like the first question. Well, you all have one here. Like this. That's an embedded system, right? Like so basically anything that's not a laptop and not like a desktop computer, and that is a computer, that's like an embedded system. Okay. So mobile phones are embedded systems, but you have embedded systems absolutely everywhere. Like you have embedded systems in your car, you have embedded systems in your TV, in just like everywhere there's a computer, and it's not like a full like standalone computer. That's what we call an embedded system. Okay, so like what's the most famous embedded system that people use for making, for example, like art installations or projects or whatever? Like there is one that all of you actually know. Starts with an R.
Not Arduino.
So Arduino is a form of embedded system, absolutely. It doesn't start with an R. It's like an Arduino. Okay. No, but like speaking of a completely standalone computer, that's an embedded system, and that you guys actually potentially use. Any?
The Raspberry Pi.
The Raspberry Pi, exactly. You know, like so the Raspberry Pi is an embedded system. Okay, so Arduinos are embedded systems. So that was actually a very good answer. Raspberry Pis are embedded systems, and so here we're mostly going to look at embedded systems that are used for audio processing. Okay, cool. So the most straightforward way to do embedded processing, and of course, like we're doing this, you know, like because for your projects or for other things that you might do for other classes, you know, and that require embedded systems, like this is potentially useful, right? So so the most straightforward way to do embedded system audio programming is using a Linux embedded platform. Okay, so basically we already talked about this. That's the Raspberry Pi. Okay, so the Raspberry Pi is a full standalone computer, and because it's a full standalone computer, you can actually use it to do audio processing. You see, it has a jack output. Okay, so it means that if you want to use the Raspberry Pi to do potentially audio processing, so for example, to build a musical instrument or something like this, you could use the Raspberry Pi. Okay. This one is another example. That's the BeagleBone. So the BeagleBone is just the competitor of the Raspberry Pi. So they're very similar systems. They have very similar specs. You know, it's just that as we'll see later, The BeagleBone might be more adapted for audio processing because there's this thing called the Bella, which works with the BeagleBone and that potentially adds extra features to it. And there's not really any equivalent for the Raspberry Pi. Okay. So what are the advantages of Linux-based embedded platforms, like over other kinds of platforms that we might use for this? So basically they're small computers, okay? So it means they're based on a CPU, a central processing unit. And CPU is basically the heart of your computer. All your computers here in the room, they have a CPU, and the CPU is what does computation on your computer, okay? They have a complex architecture, which means that they have a BIOS, they have a boot sequence. So because they have a boot sequence, it means that they take some time to start, okay? Just like your computer, you know, like your computer has a boot sequence, so it means that whenever you start your computer, it's going to take some time before it's actually usable and operational. We'll see that it's not the case of all systems, you know, and so that's potentially one of the disadvantages of using Linux embedded systems. They have a lot of computing power because they're based on a CPU. They also have RAM, they also have ROM. So it means that they're usually based on a von Neumann type of architecture. Okay, so they're really just like a computer. They have an operating system. The operating system is very important in our case because on the one hand, it makes things easier, but on the other, it also creates a lot of problems. And so we'll talk more about that today during this lecture. Again, the operating system makes embedded Linux system easy to use, okay, which is less the case of other types of systems, like the one we're going to use in this class, like the Teensy, for example, which is slightly harder. There exist special Linux distributions for this type of platform that are specifically targeted for audio, okay? So if you buy a Raspberry Pi, the operating system on the Raspberry Pi, do you know what the operating system on the Raspberry Pi is? Who used the Raspberry Pi here before? Okay, so that's like maybe a third of you. Okay, so what operating system do you use on a Raspberry Pi normally? Like, those of you who use the Raspberry Pi just know.
Linux Manjaro. Linux Manjaro.
Linux Manjaro. Okay, so that's very exotic. But it's good, you know. Like in fact, I'm actually using Manjaro on this computer, like so that's very good, you know. Like but usually like the traditional operating system for the Raspberry Pi is called Raspbian, and it's Debian. It's a specific version of Debian Linux that is specifically adapted for the Raspberry Pi. Okay. Now, as I said, there's a few Linux distributions for the Raspberry Pi that are specifically targeting audio processing. Okay, and that's the case, for example, of Satellite Karma. Okay, so Satellite Karma is kind of an old project. No one really uses Satellite Karma anymore. But basically, Satellite Karma is a specific version of our own Linux distribution that we use here at Karma, which is called Planet Karma. Okay, so if you use one of the computers here, like it's running our own Linux distribution, which is called Planet Karma. It's maintained by Nando, Fernando Lopez-Escano, who's the sysadmin of Karma. And Satellite Karma is a specific version of Planet Karma, which is specifically designed for running on embedded systems, and that is prioritizing audio processing. Okay. So now the problem of using an operating system is that it usually introduces latency. Okay, and that's also the case on your computer. If you try to do audio processing on your computer, there's going to be some latency involved, you know. And like, by the way, do you know what the typical latency you get on a laptop like this one. And so by latency, I mean the time it takes to get audio in and audio out of your computer. Like there is some latency between the time audio is actually going in your computer and then going out of your computer. Yeah.
I've measured it. For me, it's been on the range of like 50 to 100 samples. I don't know if I'm using weird stuff though.
So, well, first it depends, right? It's never like a fixed or constant value. Like it depends a lot on the buffer size of your system, right? So, so the larger the buffers, the more latency you're going to have. But it's not just the buffer size. Like the computer that you're using, the hardware of your computer, the DAC, the ADC, they all add extra latency to the system. So usually, like on the systems that you have here in this room, so like your personal computer, like latency is probably going to be around 5 milliseconds, you know, like, or something like this, you know, like, and by changing different parameters, you can probably crank it down to 1 millisecond, especially if you have a Mac, not a Windows computer. If you have a Windows computer, you're probably never going to get to 1 millisecond. And then if you have a Linux computer, you can probably get it under 1 millisecond by really, really optimizing things, but it's pretty hard, you know. We'll see later that with the Teensys, you can actually go much lower than this because the Teensys don't have an operating system. And the operating system is what is actually adding latency because it's requiring the system to use longer buffers, okay? So another disadvantage of using Linux-based embedded platforms to do real-time audio signal processing is that a full operating system is ran to carry tasks that are often very simple, you know? So in our case, everything that we want to do is to do audio processing and have sensors to interact with the audio processing that we're running, right? But you don't want to have like an entire operating system to do this, you know, like the operating system takes care of scheduling and things like that, you know, like you don't really need that for the kind of stuff that we do in this class. So that's why we're not really using Linux-based embedded platforms, okay? You have any questions about this or, today the point is just to give you an overview of what's out there to do embedded audio signal processing and also to sort of justify the fact that we're using the Teensy in this class, okay? So this is more like for your general culture around that kind of stuff. Also, I like to give this lecture in 250A because that's my area of research. You know, I'm a computer scientist more than a musician. So, so this is my area of research, you know, and so that's why, like for me, I think it's interesting that at least at some point during this class, I talk about that kind of stuff. So, any questions or no? Okay. So, who said actually use the Raspberry Pi to do audio processing before? Raise your hand. So, you, Celeste? Okay. How was your experience using a Raspberry Pi to do audio processing?
It took a while to configure, like to set up the whole environment, but then it worked fine. Like it takes a while to boot, and then you start it. Takes like from 5 seconds to start, but then it works.
So did you use like pure data or Chuck or?
Both.
Both.
I started with pure data, but then Chuck also
okay.
started.
So that's one of the other advantage of using a Linux-based platform to do audio processing is that you have access to high-level tools that people use to do audio processing, like pure data, Chuck, Super Collider, all that kind of stuff, which is not necessarily the case of lower-level platforms like the one we're going to use in this class. So this is definitely more accessible. Okay, I have another question for you. Did you use an external audio interface or?
I bought one that was like very old. It kind of simulates the beta functions, so it's an external like you connect on top of the Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, okay. So you did use, like you didn't use this, right? Okay. So for those of you at some point who would be like, oh yeah, I want to use the Raspberry Pi to do embedded audio processing. The Raspberry Pi doesn't really have an audio interface built in, so this is just a PWM output, and so it means that audio quality on the Raspberry Pi, if you use the headphone jack, is really, really bad. So in most cases, people actually have to use an external audio interface, which either is going to be like a shield that gets connected to the card, or USB audio interface that you might want just to connect to the system, like on a regular computer. So, oh, and also the reason why I put this picture at the beginning, I forgot to talk about this. So, do you know this puppet? No? Not even like karma people?
I mean, I know that next to the month.
Well, so this is Nando, okay? This is Nando. So Nando is our sysadmin. So he's the person in charge of maintaining the computers here, and also of well, he's also like the person maintaining Planet Karma, which is our custom Linux distribution. And so this puppet is Ping, because it's a penguin. It's named Ping, okay? And it's very famous, actually. Like in the Linux audio community, like because it's the only entity, I'm not going to call it a person, but it's the only entity that went to all the Linux audio conferences since the beginning of Linux audio conferences. And Nando is the keeper of Ping. And if you go on the Karma website, there is an entire page about Ping. And Ping has a little problem with alcohol. And so the web page on the Karma website is really about that. You know, like, you know, Ping's trashness, basically. So if you're interested about this, like maybe I can send you the link on Canvas. You know, like it's good to know about Ping. You know, in fact, last night Nando sent me pictures of Ping, who was like lying like between bottles of whiskey. You know, like so, which it's kind of fun. Anyway, so. Another option to do embedded audio processing on a, well, just in general, is to use microcontrollers. Okay. So what is a microcontroller and how does it differ from Linux-based embedded platform? Yes?
Microcontroller doesn't have a central processing unit or an operating system. But then it also does have inputs and outputs and some computational power and memory.
Yes, that is perfect description of what a microcontroller is. So microcontroller is an alternative to a CPU. Okay, so it's something that does computation. Okay, but it's not a CPU. It's a microcontroller. And the main difference between a CPU and a microcontroller is that a microcontroller has a lot of inputs and outputs. Okay, the CPU is done to do heavy computing. Microcontroller is designed to be interfaced with the rest of the world. Okay, so microcontrollers have analog inputs, they have digital inputs, digital outputs, and they have lots of them. You know, and so that's the main strength of microcontrollers. Now, microcontrollers are much simpler in design than CPU, so they're less powerful, like much less powerful than CPUs, and they have a much simpler architecture, which means that potentially they run a little bit faster in terms of latency than a CPU for specific kinds of applications. Okay, so what is, you all know of one microcontroller. What is it? Arduino. Like, so the Arduino is a microcontroller, you know, and in fact, this is an Arduino. This is a very old one. But basically, the Arduino is the microcontroller, and the Teensy that we're going to use in this class is also a microcontroller. Okay, so what are the main features of microcontrollers? So as I said, microcontrollers are not very powerful. They typically have a clock which is inferior to 200 megahertz. 200 megahertz is already a lot for a microcontroller. Okay, so for example, Arduinos, I think they're only 128 kilohertz. So they're not powerful at all. You know, like just to compare that to your computer, like this computer has like, I think 4 cores, and each core is at least 2,000 megahertz. Okay, so this is like the CPU is much more powerful than a microcontroller. Microcontrollers have very, very, very little RAM. That's another problem with microcontrollers, and that's a problem you're going to face a lot during 250A. They're very simple, they don't have a bias, they have analog inputs. So if they have analog inputs, it means that you can connect sensors to them, right? Like, so if you want to connect a potentiometer or something like this to a microcontroller, you can, which is not necessarily the case on the CPU. Well, it's not the case on the CPU. They don't use a lot of power, so they're very energy efficient because they're meant to be embedded, okay, which is not the case of CPUs. They don't run an operating system, they run a firmware, which is much, much more primitive than an operating system. And finally, they're usually programmable via USB. Any comments on this or no? Okay. So now, in recent years, there has been a new family of microcontrollers that are more powerful than the one that people used to use until now. And it's the ARM Cortex M4 family. Okay, so ARM is basically the manufacturer of the microcontroller. Okay, so if you buy an Arduino, some Arduinos are based on ARM microcontrollers. Okay, and the Cortex M4 microcontroller is much more powerful than all microcontrollers that have been designed until now, and they have a very specific element on them which allows us to do real-time audio processing, which was not the case before, and that element is an FPU. Do you know what an FPU is? Have you heard of that before?
Floating point?
Yes, it is a floating point unit. Okay, so what does it mean? It means that on an Arduino, like an Arduino Uno, for example, you can use floating points. You know, you can see, you can say like float, whatever. Okay, so you can use floating points, but they're not natively supported by the processor on the Arduino, which means that whenever you use floating points on an Arduino, it's going to be very slow. Like the Arduino is going to take a lot of time to do any kind of processing, like mathematical operations on an Arduino. Now, if you have a processor that has an FPU, so floating point unit, it means that floating points are natively supported by the processor in hardware, which means that any operation you're going to do on a processor that has an FPU and that involves floating point is going to be very, very fast. Okay, so to give you an example of this, because this is kind of important, at least to know that this is happening, like for when we do this class. So this is a comparison between the Teensy 3.2 and the Teensy 3.6. The 3.2 doesn't have a floating point unit. The 3.6 has a floating point unit. Okay, so I know it's a weird table, and it's very hard to know what it means, you know, like, but basically, these numbers here, like 34 and 75, they're the number of sine wave oscillators that you can run in parallel on both systems, okay? So the 3.6 is twice as powerful as the 3.2, okay? But the 3.6 has a floating point unit. The 3.2 doesn't have a floating point unit. So you see that if you run your sine wave oscillators as integers, okay, so it means that your sine wave oscillator is not being computed using floating points, but pure integers. There is not a very big difference between the 3.6 and the 3.2. Like on 3.2, if you use 32 bits integers, you can run 20 sine wave oscillators, and on the 3.6 you can run 33, right? Now, if you look at floating points, okay, so if you're running your sine wave oscillator using floating points and not integers, well, on 3.2 you can run 3, and on the 3.6 you can run 60. Okay, and so it means that it makes a very, very, very big difference. Okay, so I know most of you here don't necessarily have a background in like DSP or like low-level computer science, but all that I can tell you is that it's much, 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 much simpler to do audio DSP using floating points than using integers, you know? Because if you use integers, it means that you're not allowed to have decimal numbers, you know? And if you want to do, like, if you want to write an algorithm without using decimal numbers and only using integers, it's tough, it's hard, you know, like it depends what you're doing. But say you want to make a filter and it's a recursive filter, like if you don't have floats, you're gonna be in trouble, you know? And so so basically it's very nice that we can use floats. Okay. And in fact, for a very long time, you know, people had not this option. Like for a very long time, like until the 90s, like when people wanted to do embedded or just like real-time audio signal processing, they had to use integers. And so it was like a real job, you know, like they were engineers in companies that were specialized in converting like differential equations that use decimal numbers into computer algorithms that only use integers, you know, and it's a really hard task to do. There is a class at Stanford that you can take that actually teaches you to do this, and it's an electrical engineering class, and I forget the name of the class, or like the number of the class, but it's pretty tough, like just, so maybe you don't want to take it. Anyway, so an alternative to the Cortex M4, and there is also the M7 now. Like the Teensy 4.0 is actually based on an M7. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but an alternative is the ESP32. And so those of you who are doing already like art installations or things like this probably heard about the ESP32. So the ESP32 is basically a competitor of the Cortex M4 and M7. And it has a couple of advantages over Cortex M4 and M7 based systems. And mostly they have Bluetooth built in, they have Wi-Fi, and they're made by a Chinese company, which means that they're much cheaper. And so there are a lot of people who use the ESP32 to do projects, you know, like including at CCRMA and just in our field in general, you know, like so it is an alternative. I personally don't like the ESP32 too much because I think that the toolchain for programming it is too heavy and you know, just like causes too many issues. But a lot of people use it though, and so it's a good alternative. Like this model here is only like $5. So it's very cheap. And so with $5 you get like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and everything. Like so it's like that's the main advantage of the ESP32. It is a very cheap platform. Okay. So the ESP32 has been used for building a very, very large number of boards that are specifically designed for audio processing. And the Lyra-T is one of them. And there's a bunch of people in our field who are using the Lyra-T to do installations or build instruments, and it's nice, because this board is only, I think, $10, so it is cheap, and it has an audio input, has an audio output. You can actually plug a battery to it, which is nice. You can plug an SD card. You have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. So again, usually the main strength of the ESP32 is that it provides a lot of features that other boards don't have. Or if you want to add them to those boards, you probably have to pay extra money to get an external hardware that is going to add some specific features to these boards. Okay. That's just an example. If you go on their website, they have I don't know, at least 20 different boards. And specifically dedicated for audio, and so yeah, it's interesting. The reason why they have so many boards for audio is because at some point, connected speakers, like home, how do you call it, home assistants or whatever, like Alexa or whatever. So a lot of startups wanted boards like this to do prototyping for this kind of technology, and so that's the reason why they started making those. They didn't make those because they thought that some weird people were gonna make musical instruments. They actually started doing this because there was a real need for the market because of home assistance, and so it's pretty cool, because this community here completely benefited from the fact that home assistants needed audio processing, and so I think that's interesting. Okay, so this one is really, really cool because it really does everything, and it's super, super, super cheap. Well, it's slightly more expensive now, but I think now it's $20. And so for $20, you have 9 degrees of freedom sensor, so accelerometer, gyroscope, everything, everything you want. You have an SD card reader. You can plug a lithium battery, and there is a charger built in for the lithium battery, which is pretty cool too. The audio chip on it is very high quality. It's the same as the iPhone, so it's very, very high quality audio chip, and Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, $20. It's pretty amazing. It's actually so amazing that at some point, while I'm talking about this, I can show you. So at some point, I had this project called Amsterdam Ground. And so maybe in my computer, I updated my computer yesterday and it did something weird to it. So okay, so basically we made those speakers, okay, and see there's straps, so you're supposed to put them in your hands, and they're programmable musical instruments for kids, basically, and so kids learn math through audio programming in middle schools, and then they make musical instruments, and then we bring artists to teach them how to use them to make a piece, and then they do a concert, and then you have all these kids making noise together, so it's pretty cool. And so basically this instrument is based on this board, and you see that the form factor of this card sort of decided the form factor of this instrument. You know, like, and so yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. Anyway, we made 300 of them, and it was pretty tough because when you want to make 300 of something like this, it's not enough to be mass produced, but it's a lot to be like handmade, you know. Like, so we hired a student. We paid him, like the student was paid, you know, like, of course, you know, and so it took him like 6 months actually, you know, like, and a lot of soldering, you know, so. Anyway, so this is the Teensy 4.0, and this is the board that we're going to use in 258. Okay, so let me take some time to open the specs of the Teensy 4.0. Okay, so you see that price of the Teensy 4.0 is now $23, so it's not super expensive. So you all know that you pay a lab fee for 258. All that I want to say is that the lab fee has been the same for 4 years now, you know, and so every year CCRMA is increasingly fucked by the lab kits, you know, and so now like the total cost of the lab kit for this year I think was $100, you know, like so CCRMA is actually paying for some of this, you know, like so I just want to say that we're not making money on the lab kit, we're actually losing money on the lab kit. So you know, it's just that it's so hard to chimp this on Access, you know, that it's probably worth that extra like $100, you know, like to not go through the hassle of just asking Stanford to chimp this. So, anyway, so the Teensy 4.0 is based on an ARM Cortex M7. Which is clocked at 600 megahertz. Okay, so it is actually fairly powerful. With the Teensy 4.0, you can run about like 600 or 700 sine waves oscillators in parallel, which is a lot, you know. Like, so all that to say that with the Teensy 4.0 that you have in your kits, you're never really going to run out of computing power. Like most of the things we're going to do in this class is gonna run fine on the Teensy 4.0, you know, like, so you never really have to, you're not really gonna have to think too much about this. However, the Teensy 4.0 only has 1 megabyte of RAM, which is not a lot. Yes! Ivan, it's not a lot.
I can't work with that.
Anyway, so just to sort of give you an idea, so if you record audio on a computer, you know, every sample is its floating points, you know, it's on 32 bits. So you need usually 48,000 samples per second at 32 bits. So so if you do the count, you get to 1 megabyte very quickly, basically. You know, like so with 1 megabyte you can record barely 1 second of audio. So it means that it's very little. So it means that if you want to implement a reverb, you want to implement an echo, or anything that has a large memory footprint, you're gonna struggle with the Teensy. Okay, and this is very important actually, because eventually you're gonna face this problem. Like you're gonna be like, okay, I'm gonna put this, I'm gonna put that, I'm gonna put that on my Teensy, you know, like, and then the Teensy is not gonna start, and then you're gonna be like, oh, I wonder why it's not starting. You know, like, well, it's probably because you ran out of memory, and so you're really gonna have to be very diligent about this. You know, and keep in mind that you don't have a lot of RAM on the Teensy. Okay, so you're never really going to run out of flash memory, so it means the program you're going to put on the Teensy is always going to fit on the Teensy, like it's not going to be a problem. The problem is the memory that you allocate and that you need when running your program. Okay, so you see that we have 40 digital inputs and outputs. So it means you can connect a lot of things to the Teensy. So digital inputs and outputs are for like buttons or sensors that might be like digital sensors. So you can actually connect a lot of things to this board. 14 analog inputs. So say you want to connect like 14 potentiometers on the Teensy, you could do it. If you multiplex them, it could be even more. You know, like so there is a lot of things that you can do with the Teensy. Yes. Any questions about this or no? Yeah.
What's the easiest way to confirm that running out of RAM is the problem that we face if we do encounter a RAM issue?
That's a very good question. So there is no easy way. So it depends on the algorithm you're going to put. You know, like, but if your algorithm statically allocate memory, then the Arduino IDE will tell you that your program is trying to allocate too much memory before you put it on the Teensy. However, if your program dynamically allocates memory, which is often going to be the case, then the Arduino IDE is not going to tell you anything. And so the only way to diagnose this problem is to put prints in your program, and if the prints print, it means that your Teensy is running, and if they don't print, it means that your Teensy is constantly crashing and segfaulting, basically, you know. And usually, if your Teensy is segfaulting, like it's because of that. Okay, so like it's fairly easy to debug. You know, like you know, like it's kind of a weird way to debug this. You know, like yeah, if your Teensy like keeps like starting and crashing at startup, like usually like if you have your headphones and it does it. It's like it's trying to start, you know, like, but then it's crashing. Usually that's because it's trying to reach memory that doesn't really exist. So, good question. When we do lab 2, we're going to talk about this, you know, like, because definitely that's a problem you're going to have at some point. So, so that's a good question. Any other question or? Okay, so an alternative to the Teensy that some of you might have heard of is the Daisy. So the Daisy is named after Max Matthews. You remember like Daisy, Daisy. So that's why they called it like this. Okay, and so the Daisy is specifically designed for audio processing. The Teensy 4.0 is general purpose. You know, like people use it for audio, but people use it for robotics, for like many other kinds of applications. The Daisy is specifically designed for audio processing, and in many respects, it's better than the Teensy. Why is it better? Well, first, because it has a very high quality audio chip on it, much better quality than the one that we're actually going to give you for 258. So it's very high quality in terms of audio, and also it has more memory. I think it has 64 megabytes of memory, which is 64 times more than the Teensy. So it means that all the problems that I was telling you about, it doesn't really have them. It's made by this American company called Electrosmith. No, that was not the right button. And yeah, you see, it's based on an ARM Cortex M7, but which is not as powerful as the one of the Teensy. So it's not as powerful in terms of computing power because it's only 480 megahertz, but it does have 64 megabytes of RAM. Okay. So now you're probably like, okay, so if this is so great, why don't we use it? And also it's cheaper, you know, like because the Daisy seed is $27. Okay, the Teensy 4.0 is cheaper, but if you add the audio shield to it, which is part of your kit too, then I think the audio shield now is like $15. You know, like so the Teensy 4.0 plus the audio chip is more expensive than the Daisy seed. So why aren't we using the Daisy seed in this class? Well, that's a good question. We could use it, we could, but it has a big problem though, and I think that's a big design flaw from the people who actually made it, which is that I don't know if we see it here. I guess they probably hid it. No, but I don't know. So the main issue with it is that it has very little flash memory. So it means that your programs very often don't fit on it. So again, you know, like there is a difference between the RAM and the ROM, right? And so when I say flash memory, I'm talking about ROM. And ROM is very limited on the Daisy, and very often when I try to do projects with the Daisy, like I actually ran out of memory, like to actually put the program on it. And whereas RAM is a problem, but you can always try to find a workaround it. If you run out of like memory space on the chip, there's not that much that you can do. So so that's why we're still using the Teensy 4.0. And also the toolchain for the Teensy 4.0 is much simpler than for the Daisy. Like it's so every year I'm like, okay, so should we move to the Daisy or not? You know, like and every year I'm like, okay, I think the Teensy is like is super stable. Like I never had any problems with the Daisy. You know, like, and I know that people had problems with the Daisy in the past. So that's why. Yeah.
Could you change the size of the bootloader?
To gain space. I suppose you could, yeah, but I think they probably already tried that, you know, like so. But I guess that could be a workaround, but I'm sure they already tried to optimize this as much as they could. You know, like to me, like their main mistake is that when they chose the ARM processor to go on the Daisy, they just took one that was too small. You know, like and maybe like I'm sure like getting an ARM processor like slightly bigger, it would have increased the price of the Daisy by like maybe $2 or something like this. You know, and so to me like that's kind of a pity. So anyway. I like the Teensy, and also like the Teensy is designed here in the United States, so you know like it's very well done, you know, and like I had a lot of problems with this because like design-wise sometimes there's weird things, you know, like it was not done necessarily like super well, you know, and so but usually like Daisy Seed and Teensy 4.0 are what you want to go for your project. Okay, so another thing that I want to say about those embedded platforms is that because they're much lower level than Linux embedded platform, the only way you can program them is by using low-level programming languages. You know, and so so if you want to program the Teensy for audio processing, you have to use C or C++. You know, like if you want to make your custom audio processing on the Teensy, you have to use C or C++. And C and C++ are hard to learn, you know, and that's why we're using Faust, because Faust is an alternative, because Faust can generate C and C++ code. And so so the reason why we're using Faust in the class is because Faust can allow us to program these kind of platforms in a very simple and straightforward way without having to use C or C++. if you want to use C++ for 258 because you love C++ and you master C++, like that's not a problem. Like I teach another class where we do this, like where we do low-level embedded processing using C++, and it's based on the Teensy. If you're interested, I can share. There is a website. It's like for 258. Like so. So if you want to program the Teensy with C++ and then with Faust, you can do it. It's very well documented. So it's hard. Cool. Okay. So basically, like I'm going up in terms of complexity. So it means that by 1120, it's going to be a really hard stuff. Okay. Well, in terms of the complexity of the platform that we are going to use. So an alternative to embedded Linux-based platforms and microcontrollers is embedded CPU-based computers for bare metal audio applications. Okay, so this is tough. This is actually kind of hard. So what does this mean? Actually, do you have an idea what I'm talking about here, or not at all? Do you know what bare metal means? Well, in computer science, when you say bare metal, it means without an operating system. Okay, so it means that if you really want to suffer, you can, no, but actually, like, it's tough. Like, you can use the Raspberry Pi without Linux, where you are basically going to make your own kernel from scratch by hand to run on the Raspberry Pi. Okay, so so it means that it's like make your own operating system. It's not really an operating system per se. It's more like a kernel, so more like a firmware. And you can actually use the Raspberry Pi to do this. And there's a few, but not many, frameworks that you can use to do this. One of them is called Circle, just like a circle. And Circle allows you to program the Raspberry Pi only in C++. So without going through an operating system. Okay. And so why would you do this? Because it's tough, like, I mean, it's like you make your own operating system in a way, like, so, well, there are many advantages of doing this. So one is the large computing power of the Raspberry Pi, which is greater than 1 gigahertz, now it's even like greater than 2 gigahertz, so much, much, much more powerful than a microcontroller. You have tons of RAM, 512 megabyte on basic Raspberry Pi models, whereas you only have 1 megabyte on the Teensy. There is no analog inputs, but that's something that can be easily changed if you add an external ADC. Yeah, it's not natively programmable with USB, and it's much higher power consumption than a microcontroller. Okay, so why would you do this? You would do this because you can benefit from using a super powerful platform without having its disadvantages, basically. And the main disadvantage of Linux-based systems is that they're slow because of the operating system. So you can have very low latency on a Raspberry Pi if you don't put an operating system. And along the same lines, if you optimize your C++ code using what we call intrinsics, you can actually make your Raspberry Pi probably 4 times more powerful than your laptop for audio processing applications. And there's a couple of companies that actually use the Raspberry Pi to do audio processing natively. And one of them is Mode Duo, guitar pedal. Okay, so this guitar pedal is based on a Raspberry Pi, and it's a commercial product, but it's not running an operating system. So they can run dozens of audio effects in parallel on this. You would not be able to do it on your computer, and they can do it because they run audio processing bare metal on the Raspberry Pi, doing all these hard optimizations that I'm telling you about. So there are advantages, but it's hard. Like, I mean, for 250A, don't try to do this. And, okay, I already told you about this. Yeah, there we go. See, like there's a link to Circle here. So if you want to use Circle, you can potentially have a look at this. So at some point, I started trying to write a Faust to bare metal Raspberry Pi compiler. That was like 2 or 3 years ago, and then I got busy and I did something else and I never finished it. But if you're interested, I can share with you my code from like 3 years ago, which probably doesn't work anymore. You know, like if this is something that interests you, like it was kind of working. You know, like I had like MIDI, so you could actually connect a MIDI keyboard to the Raspberry Pi, and then audio would run. Bare metal on the Raspberry Pi was fully funny, but it had a lot of limitations, so I actually stopped working on that. Any questions or? No, okay. All right, so this one is important. That's the Bella. Bella is kind of a middle ground between this and that, okay? So this is, I think, by far the platform that people use the most in our field to make installations or instruments or whatever. You know? So if you go to the 9 conference that I told you about during the first class, probably half of the projects you see there, they're based on the Bella. Same for the Goffman musical instrument competition, you know, like people use the Bella a lot. So why do people use the Bella a lot? Because they try to find a nice middle ground between something which is very low level, like this, and the benefits of having an operating system. So the Bella is based on a BeagleBone. So you remember the BeagleBone, we briefly talked about it during the beginning of the class. So that's the BeagleBone, right? So the Bella is based on the BeagleBone, and there is this sister board that connects to the BeagleBone, and that adds better audio processing facilities. And so what happens with the Bella is that it's running Linux. Okay, so you can run like Pure Data, you can run Super Collider, you can run Chuck, you can run like all the like standard computer music or music technology environments that people know. But all the audio DSP portion is actually run outside of the operating system. So it means that you sort of get the best from both worlds, you know, like because you benefit from potential optimizations of running audio outside of the operating system. You have less latency. The Bella, I think, has 6 audio inputs, 6 audio outputs, you know, like so it is a very nice platform. You can connect sensors. So that's why people use it so much, you know, like because it's both like accessible and easy to use, and also like very powerful and reliable. Okay, so then again, you're probably like, why don't we use it in 250A? This is so great. Well, because it's too expensive. And I would say like that's the main drawback of Bella. Like if you buy the BeagleBone, and if you buy Bella, and if you buy like everything that you need to run the system, it's going to be more than $200. And so that's the main disadvantage of the Bella. Like the Bella is an expensive platform, and so well, maybe for your projects you might want to use it, because you can afford it, but for 258 it was a little bit too much, just for a kid. So we're not using the Bella for this reason. And also, I kind of prefer lower level platforms like the one that we're going to use. So, okay, so that's another middle ground. So this is an alternative to the Bella, and it's called the ELK. So what is the ELK? Well, it's exactly the same thing as the Bella, but for the Raspberry Pi. So again, the Bella is based on a BeagleBone. The ELK is based on a Raspberry Pi. By many on many aspects, the ELK is better than the Bella, because it came after, so they tried to make something better, it's a different company. And so it's better because the audio chip they're using is higher quality than on the Bella, in many respects, this is better than the Bella, except that it's even more expensive. So if you get a Raspberry Pi and if you get the ELK together, you're probably closer to $300 than the Bella. And it's also a smaller company, and the Bella really took off, so there is a big community behind the Bella, which is probably less the case with the ELK. Still no questions or no? Okay. All right. So now we're getting into the realm of professional products. Because basically all the stuff that we looked at until now, they're more for DIY applications. So mostly in the context of classes like this, or people who don't necessarily have an engineering background. So all the other things I'm going to tell you about now, it's more on the professional side of things. Okay, so an alternative to all the things that I mentioned earlier are digital signal processors. And so until not so long ago, so until very recently, if you were buying a professional, commercial audio product that was doing audio processing, like a synthesizer or guitar pedal or something like this, they were all based on this, on a digital signal processor. Okay, so the term DSP is slightly ambiguous because people use it in our field to talk about digital signal processing, okay? But they also use it to talk about digital signal processors, which is actually a chip, like a physical chip, right? So a DSP is a processor, just like a CPU, okay? But it's optimized for the operational needs of digital signal processing. And what are the operational needs of digital signal processing? Usually it's doing a lot of multiplications. Because that's what's costing on the CPU, and so DSPs are optimized to do multiplications. And so it's most commonly used for professional solutions for audio applications, and it's programmable in C++, and more and more DSPs are floating point compatible. Okay, so basically, again, if you buy a Korg keyboard or a Yamaha keyboard or guitar pedal or whatever you open it, that's what you find. You find a DSP in it. Okay, it is changing though. It is changing, and there's more and more companies that don't use DSPs and that actually use microcontrollers as an alternative to DSPs, because microcontrollers are becoming more powerful, and you know the company Arturia? I visited them in December, and because they're based in France and they're actually very close to where I work, and so all their products are based on microcontrollers now. And so even like their most advanced synthesizers or whatever, they don't use DSPs anymore. They actually use microcontrollers, which is kind of a big revolution in our field, like, because, I mean, this would not have been possible like 10 years ago, yeah. So, usually, like traditionally, DSPs are only programmed in fixed point, so not floating points. Means that usually when you program a DSP, you program it using only integers. That's what I told you about earlier. And if you only use integers, it's tough to program them. And there is more and more DSPs that are floating point compatible, but well, I guess now it's kind of the norm, but if you want like a cheap DSP, it's still probably only going to use fixed point. So the leader on the market for this is Shark, and Shark is Analog Devices. Okay, so Analog Devices is the company. They're based here in Silicon Valley, and Shark is the model for the DSP. And so for a very, very long time, Shark processors were in every single keyboard that you would buy like on the market. Like if you have like a Core Triton from like 10 years ago, like it has a Shark processor in it. So if you're interested in this, they actually sell prototyping boards based on Shark processors, and that's the Shark audio module that you can get on the Analog Devices website. And actually, you can program the Shark audio module using Faust. There was a project about 4 years ago that aimed at programming the Shark DSP using Faust. So there is a tutorial on the Analog Devices website that shows you how to do it. Now I need to warn you, it's not straightforward. So it's everything but plug and play. Like the audio module is not programmable via USB. So it means that to program it, you need a DFU programmer, which means that it's a pain. You need like something between this and your computer. So you can't just connect it, use it USB. And then the tool chain is horrible. Like it's very, very bad. So and also it's expensive. I think this guy is like $300. And again, there is more and more companies, like even like super high-level professional companies that are not using DSPs anymore. So personally, I would completely discard this option. So why do people still use DSPs though? Well, because unfortunately, if you want to run a huge synthesizers that has like 32 voices of polyphony, well, that's the only thing that you can use. Like your computer can't do it, the microcontroller can't do it, the DSP can do it. Like because it is optimized for audio processing. But I mean, I only have 10 fingers, so most people don't need 32 voices of polyphony. No, but actually there are cases where you need 32 voices of polyphony. Even if you only have 10 fingers. But like in most cases it's okay. People just deal with this. All right, so now we're getting into dark magic. So, have you heard of GPUs? Graphics Processing Units? Well, all your computers have a GPU, more or less powerful. Like some of you have a dedicated GPU, others don't. But basically GPUs are designed for graphics. Okay, so if you want to do like 3D, if you want to do like VR, if you want to do like video games or whatever, you need a big GPU on your computer. Okay. So the main feature, do you know what the main feature of GPU is versus other types of processors? Like, what differentiates a GPU from a CPU? Parallel processing, exactly. So on a GPU, you have hundreds of cores, okay? On a CPU, you only have 2, 4, or 8 in like worst cases, best cases. But on a GPU, you have hundreds of cores. They're not very powerful. They're way less powerful than the cores of a CPU, but you have hundreds of them. So because you have so many cores, it means that on a GPU you can do a lot of parallel processing. Okay, and there is some algorithms in DSP, in audio DSP, that can be heavily parallelized. So if you have an algorithm that can be heavily parallelized, then the GPU is very good for you, basically, and like the gain can be significant. Like on a GPU, if you have an algorithm that can be easily parallelized, it's probably 100 times more powerful than a CPU, basically. So it means that for very specific applications, the GPU might be a good alternative, And there's this guy, Travis Scare, who just finished his PhD here at CCRMA. Like he's an electrical engineering PhD student, but he was working with Julius Smith and Jonathan Abel, and his thesis is about using GPUs for audio processing. So it's still something that is not used a lot because GPUs are kind of hard to deal with. It's not as straightforward as other types of platforms. But again, they have a lot of potential advantages, And so Travis is around, So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, you probably want to talk to him. I saw him last week, So even though he graduated, he's kind of here, I think he's working at Apple now, but he still comes a lot. So well, I guess I should have updated this slide, but I didn't, but Travis wrote a cool paper about this for the 2019 Linux Audio Conference, which took place here, actually, in 2019. But since then, he wrote a thesis, and I think the thesis is accessible, so if you're interested in that kind of work, maybe you just want to check the thesis, because it's probably more up to date than this paper. I think there is a company, I forget the name of the company, but they actually do this. Like they do audio plugins that are based on GPUs. And so it means that they can run much more stuff than other plugin companies on the same computer. So yeah, do you have any questions about this or no? Okay. All right, so now this is like the super hard stuff. So the final, is there another one after this? No, okay. The final ultimate alternative to do embedded audio processing is to use an FPGA. And so an FPGA stands for Field Programmable Gate Array. Who heard of FPGAs before? Okay, so few of you. Okay. So FPGAs are completely different from all the other platforms that we talked about before, in the sense that a GPU, a CPU, or a microcontroller has a fixed architecture. So it means that when you buy a CPU, it has a certain number of, well, it has like a fixed circuit. Like the circuit is done, it's static, you can't change the circuit, okay? And so when you write a program, the program is designed to run on this very specific circuit, you know, and that's why if you compile something for an ARM processor, it's not going to run on an Intel processor, you know, like it's because they don't have the same architecture. Like the internal circuit in the processor is not the same, right? FPGAs, it's a completely different story. FPGAs is you program the processor by designing your own processor. Okay, so it means that the goal of FPGAs is to allow people to design their own processors to do specific applications. Okay, so it's like a reprogrammable processor. So so on an FPGA, you have a certain number of resources, and so did I talk about this? No, we didn't even talk about this somewhere. Well, you have resources, and those resources are going to be multipliers, logic gates, and memory blocks, or things like this. And then as a programmer, your goal is to connect those different elements together to implement what you have to implement, you know? So usually people who work on FPGAs, they're not considered as software developers, they're considered as hardware people. Because you're really programming hardware, basically, you know, and so if you want to take FPGA classes at Stanford, they're usually not in CS, they're in electrical engineering, because people who work on FPGAs are more considered as electrical engineers than computer scientists. So to program an FPGA, you have to use a very specific kind of programming language, which is called a hardware description language. So on an FPGA, you cannot use C++, you cannot use like assembly, you cannot use like any programming language that you would normally use for a CPU. You have to use a programming language that describes hardware, you know. And there is only two. There is Verilog and VHDL, and they're extremely low level. They're like much lower level than assembly, and so like usually, like if you know how to program an FPGA and you're actually good at it, like you're probably going to make a lot of money, like because there is very few people who know how to program FPGA because it's tough. It's like that's the thing that no one wants to do, basically, you know, like and so like FPGA engineers are in very high demand in general. So where do you normally find FPGAs? You find FPGAs in any system that requires extreme stability and that needs to be completely bug-free. So you find FPGAs in airplanes, you find FPGAs in trains, you find FPGAs in cars, you know, like, because basically FPGAs are the only kind of processors, architectures where you're guaranteed to not have any bug, basically, you know, like, because if you use like a CPU, you're probably going to rely on an operating system, and because you're relying on an operating system, there's probably going to be a bug, you know, like your computer crashes all the time, you know, or I mean less now than it used to in the past, you know, like, but with computers crash. Like FPGAs, they don't crash, they can't crash, you know, like, and so that's why FPGAs are used for this kind of applications. Okay, so why am I talking about FPGAs now? I'm talking about FPGAs because they can actually be used for audio processing too, and they present significant advantages over most other platforms that I told you about before. And the first major advantage of FPGAs is that they have almost no latency. So, so if you use an FPGA to do real-time audio processing, you get less than 10 microseconds of latency. Again, like on a computer, it can not go below like the 1 millisecond threshold. So 1,000 microseconds, right? So if you want to make a system that requires extremely low latency, FPGA is a good option. Also, from a computing standpoint, if you optimize FPGAs well, they're much more powerful than microcontrollers or laptops or whatever, And so if you want to do like heavy computing and you know how to deal with the FPGA, like it's actually a good good option. Okay. By the way, so why would you need such low latency? We haven't talked too much about latency so far in this class, you know, like, like, why would you need such a low latency? Like 10 microseconds is not something that's perceivable. You're like, in fact, 1 millisecond, so 1,000 microseconds is not perceivable as well. But there is a couple of applications where you might need that. Do you have an idea of what?
I don't have one from audio, but from like robotics. You would want especially in a train or a plane, you want the time between when the sensor senses something to when the actuator like stops the car or something to be very, very short.
Yep.
Because if it's a train, it's going to be moving in that decision-making time. So, that's more distance it has to cover.
So that's one application for low latency, but in audio, there is one application that all of you know about that requires very low latency, and most of you probably own a device that's doing it. Noise canceling headphones, right? So noise canceling, do you know how noise canceling headphones work? They basically analyze the sound outside of the headphone to create a wave inside the headphone that's sort of canceling the sound that's coming from the outside. And so to compute this wave, you have to go very, 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 very fast. Because that sound moves at, you know what the speed of sound in the air is? Sorry? 340. Yeah. I thought I heard 320. So 340 meters per second. Think about your headphones, right? They're like about this size. Apple earbuds, this size. But like headphones are like this size. So like the time it takes to go from here to here is very, 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 very short. Okay, and that's the time you need to actually cancel audio. So it means that you need to go faster than the speed of sound within this very short distance to actually cancel sound in your headphones. High-end noise canceling headphones are actually based on FPGAs because that's the only platform that allows you to go that fast. Or they use like dedicated chips or whatever. But if you use a processor and you want to do like noise canceling, FPGAs is the only option that you have. So I've been working on a system to program FPGAs with Faust. So at a very high level, and it's open source and it's available. So if you're actually interested in that kind of stuff, there is absolutely no reason why you would want to use this for 258. There is no point, But this is something that interests you and you think that you might have applications for it. It's open source, and the toolchain is called CFALA with a Y, CFALA. So it's on GitHub, and so CFALA basically allows you to program FPGAs with Faust. And so, just to give you some extra background on this, the reason why we're trying to do this is because we're trying to do active control on, so the same thing as noise cancellation with the headphones, but at the scale of a room, basically. And so basically, if you put a lot of speakers in a room and a lot of microphones, you can actually remove the natural acoustics of the room and potentially replace it with an artificial one. And so, so the end goal is that, well, maybe you can have a concert hall where you can change the acoustics of the concert hall on demand. If you want your concert hall to sound like a cathedral or whatever, you just press a button, and you can potentially do this. This is only doable if you have FPGAs. Okay, that's an FPGA. So it literally just looks like a Raspberry Pi, you know, like except that, well, in fact, it has a CPU. Usually, when you buy an FPGA, there is always a CPU with it, because you still want to do a couple of operations on the CPU, because the FPGA is not necessarily practical to do everything, you know, like, but so. Yeah. This one is cool because it's open source. So like the world of FPGAs is everything but open source, because people who use FPGAs are really usually like people in big companies, you know, like for very heavy industrial applications, again, you know, like planes, nuclear power plants, you know, like, or stuff like this, you know, and so they don't really care too much about open source. But this one is interesting because it's actually an open source FPGA solution, and there is a couple more now. Like so FPGAs are becoming a bit more popular now, and especially for potential open source applications. Do you have any questions on this, or? Okay. So, again, you know, like the point of today is just to sort of give you an overview of what's out there, you know, like it's more like for your general culture around embedded audio processing. It's not going to be necessarily very useful for 258, but I think this lecture is interesting to have anyway, like, because it definitely gives you some background on that kind of things, you know, and maybe help you make decisions in the future if you want to make like installations or instruments, you know, like beyond 258. But so I'm not going to talk too much about this, you know, like, but you're probably going to hear about it during the class, which is why I very briefly wanted to tell you about it. So if you do low-level embedded systems for audio, you're going to have to deal with probably these two protocols, which are I2C and I2S. Okay. And in fact, people call them I2C and I2S. Okay. So what are these protocols? So if you have a digital system that goes from your phone to just like a CD player in your living room, for those of you who still have one, usually audio communication in those electronic circuits is carried out through I2S. Okay. And so I2S is a very, very, very low level, very primitive communication protocol between devices that do digital audio in an electronic circuit. Okay. So I2S was actually invented by Philips when the first CD players were created. And so to transmit data from the lens of the CD player to the audio chip in the CD player that's actually going to convert digital data into analog data, you have an I2S like communication bus, basically. Okay. So on the Teensy, you're going to have that. On the Teensy, there is going to be the Teensy, and then there is going to be the audio shield. Okay, they're going to be connected together. And the communication between the Teensy and the audio shield for audio information is going to go through I2S. Okay, you're never going to have to think about it. It's just going to work. But I think it's important that you keep in mind that it's there, you know, because it is actually happening. Okay. And then there is I2C. Okay, who heard of I2C before? Some of you, yeah, okay. So a couple of you. So I2C is also a serial communication standard, and it's used in digital circuits to transmit data between digital components. Okay, so say you have an accelerometer, and you want to connect it to your Teensy, and that accelerometer is a digital accelerometer. Then the connection between the accelerometer and the Teensy is going to go through the I2C standard. Okay. You're never gonna have to deal with the I2C standard directly in 250A because there are libraries to do this, you know, like so you never have to actually use I2C like from scratch, which is a good thing because it's not necessarily straightforward. However, whenever you're gonna use I2C, you're gonna have to think about where your I2C device is going to connect to your Teensy. Okay, and there are specific pins on the Teensy for I2C communication. So that's why you should know about it, because if you have a digital accelerometer or any digital sensor that you want to connect to your Teensy, you're only going to be able to connect it to specific pins on the Teensy. Okay, so this is why this is kind of important. And again, they should not be confused. I2S is for transmitting audio information. I2C is for transmitting any information. And I don't think you could transmit audio information through I2C because I think it would just be too slow, basically. I2S is really optimized for audio. So, any questions on this or no? Okay, so yeah, here you have additional information on that. You know, I'm not going to go into too much details because I think that would sort of be a little bit too much for today. Okay, so we're probably going to finish a little bit earlier today because I know this was very dense and I didn't want to bomb you with too many informations, which I did anyway. But before we finish, I just want to talk to you about the next homework, which is actually going to be graded this time. Okay, so if you go on lab 1, hopefully for today you did assignment 0 because it was due today, so hopefully you did it. Okay, again, you didn't have to submit anything, you know, like it was just for yourself. Okay, well, I mean, everything you do in this class is for yourself anyway, you know, like, so that was assignment 0. Okay, so assignment 1 is due on Wednesday, next week. Okay, we don't accept late days unless you have a very, very, very good excuse. Okay, so the reason why we don't accept late days is because there is an assignment every week, and until week 7. If you get late, it means that and like assignments are kind of increasing in complexity. So like if you are late, it means you're kind of gonna screw yourself up, basically. You know, like, and so like be careful. So assignment 1 is due on April 19th. You should send it to Kimia and Romain. And I'm sorry, David. Because Nima was complaining that it was too small the other day on the screen, so okay. So this time I'm trying to put it slightly bigger. Okay, so you want to send the assignment to both Kimia and myself, and basically what we want from you is just a video on YouTube or on whatever you want, you know, like, but it should be like easy to access, okay? Like if you put it on a Google Drive and it's requesting us like to sign up or whatever, like we're not gonna watch it, okay? So like it should be easily accessible, okay? Just okay, so what do we want you to do? We want you to make your first digital musical instrument using Faust. So design a musical instrument using Faust in the Faust Web IDE. Your instrument should be polyphonic and controllable with your computer's keyboard. If you want, or if you have a MIDI keyboard, or if you have like a MIDI interface or whatever, feel free to use it as an alternative to the computer keyboard on your computer, okay? Like, usually assignments in 250A are pretty open, okay? So this is like the basics. If you want to do more, feel free to do more, okay? Like, Okay, your FAUST program should combine at least one sound generator / synthesizer and one audio effect. Okay, something it's part of the lab, so that should be pretty straightforward. For that, feel free to use any of the FAUST 250A starter codes that you should all have checked by today, because that was part of assignment 0. Or functions of the FAUST libraries. Designing an instrument with an evolving spectrum is strongly recommended. Okay, so this is kind of what we did at the end of the lecture on Wednesday. So basically, like having an evolving spectrum makes the instrument sound kind of better and more natural. Okay, evolving spectrum is like you try to change the parameters of the filter, for example, in real time. Okay, so that would create a dynamic spectrum. Okay, this is very important. Make sure that your instrument is expressive, artful, beautiful, and playable. Unleash your inner digital luthier. Keep in mind that simplicity is often better. It's not because your code will be 1,000 lines long that your instrument will be good. Spend more time designing interactions than making something that is technically complex. Okay, so again, we don't really care about technical complexity. We all know that you have different backgrounds. Like what we care about is that it sounds good and that it's expressive and that you can use it to actually make music. Okay, so if it's only like 5 lines long and it sounds super good, we'll be happy. Okay, so like don't try to make something too complicated that doesn't work. Yeah, spend more time thinking about the interface and its mapping with the synthesizers. What parameters are available to control? How do they interact with the generated sound? Okay, so we really encourage you to think about like how you are going to interact with your instrument. Okay, and what parameters you're going to make available. What do they control? Are they like super high level and do like crazy stuff? So like you really need to think about this. So then we want you to make a demo video of your instrument. The content is very open. The only requirement is that it should contain a short music statement. Okay, so try not to make something too descriptive. It's like, oh yeah, my instrument does this and it does that, and then there's a slider that does this, and there's a slider that does that. Because Kimia is going to get very mad at you when you do this, because it's going to be really boring to watch. Okay, so we want something that is nice to watch. Think about us too. And so make it like cool, make it like musical and artful. This is what we care about. We don't want like a heavy technical description of your 1,000 lines long code in a video. Okay, so that's why the video cannot exceed 1 minute and 30 seconds. And in fact, if it's less than 30 seconds, it's better. Like make it like concise. Like make a statement. And so like short is better. It's better for you. It's better for us. Right? So we appreciate well-crafted videos. Okay. Ideally, you don't want to record the speakers of your computer with the built-in mic. If you don't know how to do this, Kimia can probably help you during the lab. Okay, so yeah, we do care about the quality of the video. So like if your video is just like your smartphone with the built-in mic of your smartphone recording the built-in speaker of your computer, well, it's okay. Like for the first time you do this, but like. We would really appreciate if there was like good audio quality. Like video quality, we don't care that much, because you're probably gonna do it with your smartphone, which is fine, but audio quality, it's better, So if you don't know how to do this, Kimia can help. And once you know how to do this, it's going to be the same for all the assignments. So the thing that you have to give us for your assignments is always going to be a video. So basically, maybe it's the right time to learn how to make a good video with a good sound. Okay. So, questions? No? Great. So next week, I promise that on Monday, I will give you the lab kit. And I also promise that it's gonna be more hands-on, okay? Like, because I know that like the past 3 lectures have been like kind of heavy and technical. Like next week it's gonna be less technical. It's gonna be more like actually making things, you know, and like playing with stuff, you know, like so. I just wanted to point that out. And please come on Monday because we're gonna give the kits. So you need to be physically present to actually get the kit. Yeah.
The deadline is like end of night, right? Like 11 p.m. or like 11:59 p.m.
Well,
we don't have extensions, is that correct?
So it's just that sometimes I like playing videos on Wednesday of people who submitted something, you know, like so. I would say like, well, I said April 19th, you know, like, so let's say midnight, but if you submitted a little bit before, so that potentially we can see your video, that's better, okay? That's a good point.
Like midnight the Tuesday before?
No, like well, we said like 19th, you know, like, so 19th is like Wednesday, right?
Yeah.
So midnight on Wednesday. So, but if it's before, it's better so that we can see videos. All your videos will be posted on the Chorus website, so and that's why we want them to be accessible. So like after grading, Kimia will post all the videos, you know, and they're, because we do it every year, you know, and so it's because we think it's good that you guys can actually watch each other's videos so that you can see what the others are doing and potentially get inspired too. So yeah.
Can we see last year's versions?
Yeah, it's all.
Okay, cool.
So all I mean all 250A websites since the origin of 250A are available. It's just that you have to find them and be creative, you know. Like, but basically, so this is the URL of this year's website. It's 250A-spring-2023. The only thing that's hard to find is the quarter, because it's never the same quarter. So last year was in winter. So if you want to watch last year's video, you say winter-2022. Okay, and this is last year's website. Okay, and in 2021, I think it was in the winter. No, it was in the spring. No, it was in the spring. Okay, it was in the spring. So you say spring 2021, but 2021 was a weird year for some reason, if you remember. So 250A was online, you know, like, so I don't know if it's necessarily like the best year to watch, you know, like you can watch 2020. I think 2020 is winter. I think. Yeah. Oh yeah, we had different pictures. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, all the 250A websites are available from previous years, and if you want to check what people did